Today on Trial Watch, the police are sworn to preserve and protect, but this woman says she was raped because a cop left her unprotected. Jessie Mae Jefferson's doctor told her to have a cesarean section. When she refused, a court ordered her to obey.
I knew what they were saying was right, but I had my trust in the Lord, and that's what I went by.
All this and more today on Trial Watch. Real people, real trials. And hello, everyone. I'm Rob Weller. With me, my co-anchor, attorney Lisa Specht.
Hello. Welcome to Trial Watch. Of all the situations a woman could find herself in, few are more terrifying than being alone in the early morning hours on a deserted city street with no way home.
That's just the predicament Linda Wood says she found herself in when she was raped one fall night. Linda says she never would have been there if she hadn't been stranded by the very same people who are supposed to keep her safe. Now Linda's suing the Washington State Patrol, claiming they didn't serve and protect. It's a bitter walk Linda Wood now takes as she revisits the place where it all happened. Pacific Avenue runs through one of the highest crime areas in Tacoma, Washington. It's here, Linda says, the officer hired by the state to protect her left her to fend for herself. A typical day for the Washington State Patrol finds them making dozens of drunk driving stops like this one. But on the night Linda's boyfriend was stopped for failing to lower his high beams, something went wrong.
Well, after the car had been stopped, he came over to the car and asked Robert if he could step out. So he did, and I sat there and waited. They were talking, and it seems like he had went through the sobriety, the test things that they do. And so they'd walk back to his car, and they put him in the back seat, and the officer had got in. So I'm sitting there wondering what's going to happen, what's going on. And he finally came back to the car, and he opened the door. He reached in, and he grabbed the keys, and he had told me that I had to get out. Well, I had asked him, I said, well, what am I supposed to do? You know, what are you going to do with me? And he just said, you have to get out. So I had gotten out, and like I said, he took the keys and he walked back to his car, and before I knew it, he was driving away.
Shocked at the prospect of being left alone on a crime-ridden city street at 2:30 in the morning, Linda says she did her best to fight her fear.
Then I thought, well, maybe he's going to come back to take me somewhere or give me a ride or call someone or something. And he had never came back. So I started walking.
At that hour, of course, almost everything was closed. And if there was any place open, Linda says she was confused and she didn't notice. But then life has dealt Linda Wood a lot of confusion from the very beginning.
Linda was very much premature when she was born. And she was about 6 months and a week. And so consequently, she was kept in the hospital almost until she was 3 months old. When she started school, she had problems, and she was slow. She didn't pay as much of attention probably as she should have. And so they did the tests that they had way back then, and they thought that she was mentally retarded.
Linda's mother says Linda wasn't retarded, but being treated that way caused her emotional problems, which eventually prevented her from learning to read or write. And back on that awful night, Linda says the only thing she could think about was getting home.
I was scared. I know I was very cold, and I just wanted to go home. A bunch of guys stopped and asked me if I wanted to ride. I thought that was a definite no, so I didn't. And two other people, the same situation, they were very scroungy looking and beat up cars, and you could tell that they had been drinking quite a bit. And I just kept turning them down. Well, the last man that had stopped, he was by himself. He seemed clean cut and nice, and he asked me if I needed a ride, and I said yes. He had asked me where I was going, and I told him, and he said he knew where that was. So I took a ride with him.
Linda's nightmare was just beginning. She was about to embark on the most frightening ride of her life. We'll see that next as Trial Watch continues. Linda Wood found herself alone and frightened, standing on a dark street in one of Tacoma, Washington's toughest neighborhoods. She says she was left there by a Washington State patrolman who had just arrested her boyfriend for drunk driving. Then she accepted a ride home from a stranger.
We proceeded on the way home, and he had turned where I don't ever turn, and he said that that was a shorter way home. I was getting very afraid. I didn't think I was going to ever get home.
Linda says then the man drove her into the woods and raped her.
I went down into the family room about to the 7:30, 8 o'clock, and she was sitting on the couch, all doubled up in a fetal position. And I spoke to her, and I said, Linda, what's the matter? And she just kept staring off into space, and she didn't answer me, so I very sharply said, Linda, what is the matter with you? And she looked at me, and she was just like she was real dazed yet, and she said, I've been raped, if that's what you want to know.
9 months and 1 day after the incident, Linda Wood gave birth to a boy she named Dominic. Coping with the rape and then a pregnancy and childbirth weren't easy for Linda. She had been married once before to a soldier in the Vietnam War. They had a baby girl, Julie, but the marriage quickly fizzled. Linda gave Julie up for adoption because she worried she couldn't properly care for the child. So the arrival of Dominic was an intensely emotional event.
We have never, ever believed in abortion. And so it never was ever a question of Linda having an abortion. And but it's been a terrible thing. It's demoralized Linda in a sense. She has no feeling of security. She doesn't know how she's going to raise this child.
Linda first spoke with lawyers about the rape when they called her in to talk about her boyfriend's drunk driving charge.
If a state employee having control over somebody puts them into a position of danger where they should know that it's dangerous, and that person, because of the police officer or custodian of that person puts them there, makes the state liable as though that officer had done the rape himself. And it's called deliberate indifference.
Linda and her lawyers sued the Washington State Patrol, asking for money to support the child she says she loves, but never would have had were it not for the State Patrol. In the beginning, the state claimed immunity from the suit, but Linda won an appeal that took several years and went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. A trial is now set for May 1991, and both sides have some major differences in the way they see the facts.
The driver was determined to be under the influence of alcohol and was arrested. At that point, our Trooper Ostrander, asked Miss Woods if she wanted a ride or something of that nature, and she chose to leave the scene at that time with people she said were friends of hers in a pickup truck which had stopped at the site of the arrest.
Linda says no offer of a ride was made. No friends came, and says Trooper Ostrander could not have known who picked her up because he left Linda there alone. The arrested driver, Robert Bell, refused Trial Watch requests for an interview, but in court papers, he confirms Linda's story, saying, quote, I asked him, are you going to leave her standing here on the street? I remember looking out, and she was standing on the street, and he had locked the car up, and he just turned around and grinned like who gives a damn and headed down the street.
Come here, Bubba.
As for Linda, she hopes winning the suit will benefit not just her son, but other people as well.
This will not happen to anybody else again, what has happened to me.
And after all she's been through, what does Linda want for the future?
I would like a little small place where I can get some animals for my son, a little small, quiet town to raise him. I'd like to go to school to learn how to read and write, so when he does come home from school, I will be able to read to him. Just simple things.
Now, Lisa, when people like Linda try to sue the police, why do they have such a problem?
Because government agencies like the state police are usually immune from lawsuits as a result of carrying out their official duties. But in this case, the court felt there were enough questions raised about whether the officer acted with deliberate indifference to Linda's safety to warrant a trial. So now a jury will decide if Linda or the trooper is telling the truth. And Trial Watch, of course, will be there when that case goes to court this May.
All right, coming up next on Trial Watch, can a judge tell you how to have your baby? It happened in Georgia. It could happen to you.
Pregnancy is one of the most cherished experiences in a mother's life. Historically, it is also the most private. But more and more, outsiders are intruding into these very special months. Jessie Mae Jefferson was near the end of her pregnancy when her doctor told her to have a cesarean section. Jessie didn't think she needed the surgery, but the doctor got a judge to order it. So Jessie turned her unborn baby's life and her own over to a higher authority. Jessie Mae Jefferson was in her 9th month of pregnancy. Suddenly, doctors at the Griffin-Spalding County Hospital in Georgia found that her pregnancy was complicated by a condition known as placenta previa. The placenta had shifted between the baby and the birth canal. Natural childbirth would be impossible. She would have to have a cesarean section. But on religious grounds, Mrs. Jefferson refused.
It's not that I totally don't believe in medicine, that medicine cannot heal, but I just believe, you know, that when I have my faith and trust in the Lord, it was impossible for anything to go wrong.
The hospital and the Georgia Department of Human Resources petitioned the juvenile court for custody of the fetus, stating that it was a, quote, deprived child without proper parental care. The Jeffersons were summoned to court and were appointed an attorney. An opposing counsel was appointed for their unborn baby.
Now, I could look at her belly and see my client. I mean, there was no question in my mind that I was representing a living human being.
It was a very tense time. The doctor from the Griffin-Spalding County Hospital came to testify and said that she could go into labor at any moment, and once she went into labor, that the child was 99 to 100% certain to die, and that she had no better than a 50-50 chance of surviving.
I knew what they were saying was right, but I had my trust in the Lord, and that's what I went by. And I couldn't make them see what I believe and everything, and I know I couldn't change their, you know, their way.
They were sitting there like they knew, you know, they had seen this, the whole thing before. They knew what was going to happen. They told us, I mean, they told us with complete confidence that, in fact, whatever was wrong, and they didn't fully understand what was wrong, but whatever was wrong, that the Lord would cure it.
In his testimony, John Jefferson read from the Bible, Psalms 128.
Blessed is everyone that fear the Lord, that walketh in his ways.
But a county physician gave a more sobering view. He said it was absolutely impossible for Mrs. Jefferson's medical condition to reverse itself.
I did not fear that myself or either my baby, you know, that we would die or anything of that sort. I didn't fear that. I didn't fear that at all.
I had these people who believed very sincerely that some superior power would intervene and save the child. And quite frankly, I believed the doctor and not them.
Judge Crumbly ruled that Mrs. Jefferson would be required to have one more sonogram. If this showed that her condition had not changed, a cesarean section would follow. But because so much was hanging on his decision, the judge, on behalf of the Jeffersons, appealed his own ruling to the Georgia State Supreme Court. In an historic precedent, the High Court agreed to hear the case that same day, 75 miles away in Atlanta. The court reporter jumped into a waiting sheriff's car. The two opposing attorneys followed. In a hastily arranged session of the Supreme Court, the justices upheld Judge Crumbly's decision. Mrs. Jefferson would be forced to undergo a C-section.
I again won, and I felt, you know, I felt very heroic, I guess, you know, in that sense. But then I came home and I talked to my wife about it that night, and my wife told me that I was wrong, and I felt like a villain at that point.
The Jeffersons were informed of the court's final decision, but before they were taken back to the hospital, John Jefferson meditated and prayed.
I just laid my hand upon her stomach, and I just prayed the simple prayer of faith according to James 5:14 and 15. And I did. While my hand was on her stomach, I felt the blockage leave, and it was by the Spirit that gave me the assurance that it had been moved. And I knew then, I rejoiced then because God gave me that sign.
I got a call about 1 a.m. the next morning and was awakened by one of the lawyers who said, "Judge, we don't know what to do. I hate to wake you up. They did one more sonogram as you had ordered, and the doctor doesn't understand it, but he says that the sonogram doesn't show the obstruction is still there. What do we do?" And so I said, well, I think what you need to do is for somebody to take Mrs. Jefferson home and leave her alone. And that's exactly what they did. And the baby was born normally and naturally 2 weeks later. I think I immediately realized that something profound had happened. I think that it's a sobering thing to have realized after this was all over that Reverend Jefferson was really right about this all along. Sometimes those who appear to be the simplest among us maybe know a lot more about nature and about life than those who have had a smattering of education.
Not all stories have such happy endings. More and more doctors and courts are telling women with difficult pregnancies how to carry and deliver their babies, and bringing charges against the women if they refuse.
Well, next on Trial Watch, when a club was closed to a lawyer because of his clothes, he reached for a new suit, a lawsuit. Visiting a big city nightclub can be a nerve-wracking experience. You can dress to the nines, hook up with your friends, pay for parking, and wait an hour in line only to be denied admission by a doorman who doesn't think you look hip enough to get in. When attorney Ken Lipton wasn't allowed into a club because of his looks, he went looking for relief in court.
You don't like it, so what? I don't care.
In many LA nightclubs, if you want to do a bunch of this, you'd better be prepared to do a bunch of this. It's a tough life out there on the line. That much tougher if you never get in. Jeff Stolzer, Teresita Dubrawl, and Ken Lipton know what that's like. They say they were barred from entering LA's posh Mayan Club after an hour-plus wait, basically because of their clothes. One of them wondered if maybe their civil rights under California's UNRRA law had been violated.
I looked it up, and it was Section 51 of the UNRRA Act, and it basically, to me, meant that any person, who's arbitrarily discriminated against in a business establishment could sue.
And sue they did in small claims court in what became known as the nerd case. The plaintiffs wore the clothes they had on that night.
I said to the man, I said, well, you have no dress code. There's no dress code. You can't say I'm not appropriately dressed because you're never going to get in here. And then I said, well, then I would sue him. And he said, why don't you get a lawyer? And I said, I am a lawyer.
Apparently there was some argument or group of discussions between Mr. Lipton and the door person. The door people are told that they should observe patrons before they come onto the premises to see whether or not they're intoxicated. They're under the influence. They're belligerent. They're hostile.
We politely asked if we were getting in, how long it was going to take, and in no way or in any manner were we hostile or, belligerent.
I think there was a very terrible attitude by these people. They just looked you over like you're scum, That's basically all I have to say.
Owner Sammy Chow denied his club has any arbitrary restrictions. But an informal Trial Watch poll of clubgoers online confirmed that many clubs have at least gained that reputation.
Well, there's certain clubs that they will actually stand outside and pick who they want to be in. It doesn't matter how long you've been in line, they will choose who they want to come in their club. And I've actually been into a couple of clubs that I was with someone of a different race, and they would not allow them in.
Is there anything about just the way he looks that you think would cause your door people not to admit him to the club?
If I'm the doorman, I'll let him in.
Okay.
The judge decided even though he's not the doorman, Sammy Chow had to pay just the same, $250 to each plaintiff. As for Ken Lipton, he's encouraging anyone who feels they were arbitrarily kept out of a place of business to go ahead and sue. And if you feel you've been arbitrarily denied entrance to a club, Lipton suggests taking them to small claims court. Lipton is busy suing another club which denied him entry because there were, quote, too many guys inside. He's claiming sexual discrimination. The club claims he wasn't allowed in because, quoting again, he's a jerk. All right, it's time now for today's Snap Judgment. Lisa is going to give you the facts in a real trial, and you try to guess the verdict.
Sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will get you into federal court. At least they got pro football coach Darrell Davis there. Davis called sports agent Harrison Henderson III, and these are his words, a sleazebag and a slime. Henderson got defensive, then he went over to the offense. He sued Davis for slander, claiming the names did hurt. He said they hurt his reputation, causing him to lose clients, and that they hurt his business. Now you make the call. Should Davis have to pay for calling Henderson a sleazebag and a slime? We'll have the instant replay right after this.
Let's get a ruling on today's Snap Judgment. Today we've got a pro football coach who's called an agent a sleazebag and a slime. How did the judge rule?
Well, federal judge Jim Kerrigan gave the decision to the coach. He recognized that calling the sports agent a sleazebag and a slime didn't constitute terms of endearment, but he said those are common insults and don't rise to the level of being factual statements. So, Coach Davis is protected by the Constitution's First Amendment right of free speech.
All righty, and that is it for today. Join us again tomorrow for Trial Watch. Real people, real trials.